All right. So I will call to order today's meeting of the Mountain View Rental Housing Committee. It's September 16th. We'll start with a roll call. Committee members Susan Almond,
I'm here.
Nicole Haynes-Livesay,
Present.
Vanessa Honey will be absent today, Julian Pardo-Dezella,
Present.
and Vice Chair Emily Ramos.
Here.
All right. Since Vanessa is out today, Nicole will be acting, our alternate. Our alternate will be voting on the record. Minutes approval from the August 12th meeting. Copies of the minutes or the above noted meeting have been delivered to the committee members, and copies are available at City Hall. To the committee, are there any questions regarding the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. Would any members of the public like to comment on the minutes from the August 12th meeting? Seeing none, if there are no corrections or additions, a motion is in order to approve these minutes.
So move.
Yes. Emily? Okay. Would anyone like to second the motion?
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor of adopting the minutes for August 12th? Aye. All right. So 4 and 1 abstention. Great. We'll move to oral communications for the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for 1 3-minute period. During this section, state law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would anyone like to address the committee at this time on a non-agenda item? So this would be on a non-agenda item.
My name is Maria Rangel, and I'm here to ask you, please. I am living in Mountain View for more than 8 years, and I really love Mountain View, and I love the diversity. And if anything changes on the rent, I rent. So I'm all by myself, and I'm working 2 jobs already to pay the rent. And if any changes come and the rent gets increased in like more than 7%, I won't be able to afford because I cannot work 3 jobs. I'm 54, I'm not a spring chicken. So I ask you please to help us to keep the rent and the apartments affordable. I would like to stay in Mountain View. I contribute to the community, and as a minority, I think it's important to keep minorities, and we all need each other, and please help us to stay in Mountain View. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ana.
Tengo 16 años viviendo en Mountain View.
I've been living in Mountain View for 16 years.
Tengo una niña de 10 años.
I have a 10-year-old daughter.
He tenido muchos problemas por la vivienda.
I've been having a lot of housing problems.
Nunca he podido rentar un departamento propio. Siempre tengo que rentar un cuarto porque es muy caro el departamento.
I've never been able to rent a full apartment of my own. I can only rent a room because it's very expensive to rent the whole apartment.
Soy madre soltera.
I am a single mother.
Tengo 10 días viviendo en un shelter.
I've been living in a shelter for 10 days now.
Tuve que desocupar el día 5 de septiembre el cuarto donde vivía. Metí todas mis cosas en una storage en San Miguel. Ahora ando de un lado a otro con mi niña.
I had to leave 10 days ago, and I have to put all my belongings in a storage in Sunnyvale, and I've been moving from place to place for 10 days.
Y estoy cansada de vivir así.
And I'm very tired to live like that.
está allá afuera.
My daughter,
Esperándome.
my,
No sé a qué horas vaya a llegar en el shelter porque no manejo, ando en el bus. Y no sé a qué horas, hasta qué horas pasa el bus para allá.
my daughter is outside waiting for me, and we don't know what time we're going to leave, and I don't know the schedule of the buses. I have to take the bus because I don't drive, and I don't know what time the last bus I need to take to get to the shelter.
Eso es todo.
That's all.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. One more. The question was, is is item 8.1, yes, is about modifications to the CSFRA. Yep. Yes, that'd be the great time. Thank you. If there are no more comments, we'll move to, item 8.1. Rental Housing Committee input for potential city-initiated 2020 ballot measure to amend the CSFRA. I believe we have a staff report.
So, good evening. My name is Tim Wong. I'm the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager, and good to see everyone again. Tonight, again, we are bringing back some proposed changes to the CSFRA for the 2020 ballot measure. And just as a background, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide input regarding potential amendments. And so tonight we will be discussing the subcommittee discussions, and staff also will have some questions to the RHC. This discussion will be based on the CSFRA Ad Hoc Subcommittee's meeting of September 4th of 2019, but it actually is a culmination of meetings that the subcommittee has been having since late July. So as I mentioned, the subcommittee has had 3 meetings, and the primary issues are relationship between RHC and the city or the city council, specific capital improvements, or in other words, potentially a separate petition process. And in addition, there have been discussions about the annual general adjustment, whether to use AGA or a flat rate. And then lastly, regulation for mobile homes. And so to start off, first and foremost, the subcommittee was very interested in looking at the relationship between the RHC and the city council or city council. From here on, I'll just call it the council to represent the entire city. But during those series of meetings, the subcommittee said that they would like the city council to have oversight of the RHC based on high-level oversight of decisions regarding persons, units, if the RHC requests city general funds, pass-throughs as part of a separate petition process, and also suspending the CSFRA. So again, more of these higher-level programmatic decisions that may affect the program as a whole. And so as part of this council oversight, some of the things that may need to be revised include council approval of any RHC decision to suspend the CSFRA. Another thing that the city council or subcommittee mentioned was potentially treating the RHC as an advisory body, which kind of segues into the next point in talking about allowing potentially non-residents to serve on the RHC. In addition, as an advisory body, they could potentially delegate responsibilities to the RHC, including if approved, a mobile home rent ordinance, or in addition, potentially submitting a work plan. And lastly, they also discussed about providing authority to make registering mandatory for all landlords. And so the other main issue that the subcommittee was discussed was specific capital improvements, and more specifically, a separate process from the current fair return petition process. And during these discussions, the subcommittee talked about eligible capital improvements, those capital improvements that are necessary for compliance with health and safety codes, which is currently in the CSFRA as we speak. But in addition, they added a couple other capital improvement categories: environmental sustainability and improvements that could potentially extend the useful life of the property. And as part of that, since the last two, environmental sustainability and extending the useful life of the property, while many times they will touch as health and safety code issues, but not always so. So as part of it, staff asked the subcommittee, what are some guiding principles that you would like to see so that some of these environmentally sustainable improvements or other improvements that extend the life of property could be included in a separate petition process? And what they came up with were the improvements had to benefit tenants. In other words, the tenants had to derive a greater benefit from the improvement, more so than the landlord. Reduce tenant costs, and that's more so towards environmental sustainability. For example, if a landlord decides to install solar panels, for example, which could potentially lower the power utility bill for tenants. And another guiding principle would be this would exclude luxury improvements. So granite countertops was mentioned, for example. So those would not be eligible as part of an eligible capital improvement. And as part of the subcommittee discussion, they were in agreement that the RHC should design the separate petition process. And so these were some of the things that the subcommittee would like the RHC, if the amendment passes, to some potential parameters or requirements that they would like the RHC to explore as part of it, including capping the amount or percentage, looking at capping any potential monthly increase or to the tenant household, and potentially an amortization schedule for that improvement, whatever that may be. In addition, there was a discussion, and this will be discussed tomorrow in front of the council also. There was not 100% agreement with the subcommittee whether to look at using a flat rate, for example, 5% annually, versus the AGA, which, as you all know, is tied to the CPI, about 3.5%. In addition to that discussion, there was also this idea of maybe adding a little additional for a landlord who is a good actor. If they met certain requirements, they could be, they're not in violation, they've done everything correct, that they may be in line for an additional increment, whatever that may be. So that was another idea that came forth from the subcommittee. And lastly, there was a discussion about regulation or rent stabilization for mobile homes. I think whether to have it part as the CSFRA amendment or to address through a city council ordinance. And I think it was all decided when staff brought this to the RHC on August 12th. The RHC decided that it would probably be best to have it in the ordinance, and the same question was posed to the subcommittee, and they also agreed that it was best that it be as part of a city ordinance. And lastly, it is a city council action, a work item, and so one of the things the subcommittee said was we wish staff to start pursuing an ordinance. They wanted it concurrent with this whole ballot measure timeframe, but because of staffing and others, it will be difficult to meet that timeframe. And lastly, staff posed a number of questions to the RHC, talking about council oversight and also some additional parameters. And so this evening, really, staff is interested in any input that the RHC may have about potential council oversight, but in addition, also focusing on number 4, if there's any, have any additional input or parameters about a separate petition process. So that concludes staff's presentation. Happy to answer any questions that the RHC may have.
All right, thank you, Tim. So we'll start with questions from the committee. Would anyone like to start with questions for Tim? We'll have our opinions and discussion in the next after public comment.
I'm a little confused. So I was at most of the last subcommittee meeting, and it seemed, or my understanding is that mobile homes could possibly be, I remember Chris Clark wanting to turn the mobile home issue back to RHC, and that possibly we would have oversight until such time as the council took over. I'm just sort of summarizing what I've heard.
There was discussion about can we temporarily put it as in the CSFRA until the city prepares and passes an ordinance. And there was some discussion about that. However, the logistics in preparing amendments to the CSFRA to tailor it towards mobile homes, there are a number of items that need to be prepared. And based on the relatively short time frame of it being in place, because as I mentioned, it's a city council work item, and currently it's estimated for a start time to start the preparation of a mobile home ordinance in January of 2020. That's an estimated time frame. We're not quite sure at this point, but it is as part of a council work plan. Because of that relatively short time frame, it may be a lot of effort for such a short time frame.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Questions for Tim? Emily?
In terms of the report that was sent back to council or to the subcommittee, how much did they actually, of our opinions, did they actually take into account? I've been to several of the meetings too, and perhaps they were more forthcoming with staff than publicly about our feedback.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think they took some RHC input. Obviously, for example, when they talk about the relationship and council oversight because the RHC was clear that they wanted to maintain their independence but the subcommittee still continued on with this line. But in terms of, for example, the mobile home, I think that confirmed their decision-making in that they felt that an ordinance would be better. And I honestly, when it comes to, for example, 5% versus AGA, I don't think the RHC was asked that question during that time. And so the separate petition process, the RHC also weighed in, and I think they agreed by allowing in their proposal to allow the RHC to design the petition process. And I remember that is something that the RHC requested, if you will.
So are you talking about the famous streamlining of the petition process?
That is correct.
They would turn that back to us?
Yeah, the design is that the subcommittee wanted the RHC to design a separate petition process with council oversight, in which they would review the percentage of pass-throughs, since that was one of their specific areas they wanted to have council oversight on.
Just to follow up there, Tim, is it your sense that they would, with the reduced time frame, are they leaning towards giving us writing something into the ballot measure that allows for the structure of us then making all the specific rules that need to be made for ongoing, let's say, capital improvements, versus trying to get that done in the next couple months, iron that all out and have that in the ballot measure?
To answer your question, that is question number 3 from staff. Is one of the things that we're looking at is, so the quick answer is no. We want to put in some, or the subcommittee wishes to put in some general language in the charter that with some maybe guiding parameters that would allow the RHC to design the separate petition process. So it would not be verbatim prescriptive language in the CSFRA.
And right now they're leaning towards that option. They're more amenable towards kind of a framework, and then giving us the freedom to iron out the details.
That is correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So, I mean, it seems to me one of the big issues is their desire to oversee us and our actions. And then they're also suggesting which actions we have independence, like petition process clarifications. It seems like it might leave things quite muddy. I don't know. I would love to know, like, legally how that would take place. That wasn't a very clear question. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Well, I think part of this is we need a little more direction from council tomorrow night as to how specific and in what areas they want oversight over the RHC. So, it may be as limited as just making it clear that the RHC members are subject to the same rules as every other commission in the city in terms of removal and code of responsibility, which you've already adopted anyway. It may be more specific that certain decisions that you might make as an RHC have to be ratified by the council, such as suspension of the CSFRA. So there's a lot of room in between all of that. And hopefully tomorrow night there will be a little more clarity in the direction. I think the subcommittee is throwing out a lot of ideas, and hopefully we'll narrow it down tomorrow.
Yeah, if I could add to that real quick. Yes, council is right that there is a lot of gray right now because of the compact timeline, those type of things. But tomorrow, staff is hoping to get a little more clarity on what items, because if you talk about persons, units, that pretty much covers most, if not all, of the CSFRA. So at what point do you want some of these decisions or items elevated to the council for their oversight? So again, that's what we're going to try to clarify tomorrow also.
Any other questions? I think one more, Tim, would be, what are the rules of engagement going forward when it comes to our legal staff kind of engaging with council, if they would like to leverage what all of our staff and also our legal team leverage their knowledge. Is that easy for them to do? Is that how does that work?
I'm sorry, could you?
So, if they wanted to delve into the details of mobile home residency law, I'm sure they would want some insight from our legal team. But right now, the fees pay for our access to the legal team. City council doesn't necessarily have access. Is that something that we need to grant them access if they want to iron some things out? How does?
Well, we have a separate contract with the city.
Okay. Gotcha.
To provide them with advice. We do other work for the city, not just rent control, but also land use, housing issues. So similarly, we have a separate contract to advise the council so that we can provide that advice. And, justifiably, it should not be coming out of the RHC rental housing fee because this is a different topic from what your budget covers.
Okay, great. That answers my question. Thank you. All right, if there's no more questions, we can move to public comment. So would any members of the public like to comment on this item? All right, we have one. Anybody else raise your hand, please? Okay, so we can stay at 3 minutes for each item. So please come forward.
Hey, Alex Brown, Santiago Villa, North Bay Shore, Mountain View. Tim, I see you brought your pop-ups with you. It's a curse. Okay, so when it comes to including mobile homes under the CSFRA, it's already been litigated that you guys have the power to do it without amending the charter through the ballot initiative process. That's something that you could agendize and vote on, sidestepping enumerating all of the laws and everything, and just drafting rules and regulations instead of specifics in the charter. That's a power that you have. It's an option that you have, and that would provide the stopgap that the subcommittee was discussing in terms of protections now that could be superseded in the future by an ordinance or improved by an ordinance that would protect other features of mobile home parks and their residents. It's something that you can do. You don't need to wait. We don't need to rush any kind of charter amendment drafting. You don't need to specifically make it work with the other things in the ballot initiative to try to sell it to voters. We could do it now. Not now. Not tonight. It's not on the agenda. But soon. Sooner than March. You can do it. You could. You have the option. If you wanted to. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
So what motivates this whole, as I understand it, change to measure V, which is to set a rent increase rate on the order of 3.5%? And now you're saying that you think in terms of justifying a 5% increase
Sorry,
rent? Am I on the
sir,
wrong page?
Just if you can mention your name and.
My name is Stan.
Okay.
I just want to get a feeling of what motivates you and others to basically amend, overturn, significantly adjust when you talk about 5% versus 3.5%. And you're giving reasons why it should be done and make it positive, because you made the statement that it's going to benefit tenants more than landlords. So the question is, are you a landlord? Do you own property and rent it out? Yes or no?
I don't, well.
I mean,
Great question.
we don't. it's not necessarily Q&A, but
It-
your
yeah.
comments, your comments can be,
Well-
they've been received and they will be heard.
Okay, everybody should think about it because a lot of effort went to make Measure V possible. 3.5% just seems reasonable. This looks like an amendment to put in a ballot for 2020, which seems like, okay, everybody passed it, we want to make a change. And now I'm saying, is the change justifiable? And the means by which it was even put on the ballot. I was very cognizant of what happened trying to get signatures. I don't know if you were, I think other people I've spoken to about that. It was a misguided and somewhat unethical methodology because it had signs for rent control when it was really a for landlord signature. I signed it with the understanding I was for rent control. The person at this table said rent control. Was it for rent control? No, it's for landlords. Landlords' benefits. So however this amendment got onto the ballot, because it also looks like it's now city initiated, and it could be people in the city who are part of this game plan. But the people who were getting the signatures, I found out later, didn't even live in Mountain View, and they were paid from some outside entity or entities to make that happen. So I'm going to here propose those who signed the document supporting what turns out now to be an amendment in favor of landlords. All those signees should be contacted and make sure they'd sign it again if they fully understand what they signed. So I can tell you right now, I found out almost after the fact, and I freaked out. I was ticked. I felt it was unjust. And I would stand by the table and I said, dude, you're going to sign that? Do you understand what you're signing? Oh, is that what I'm signing? Oh, geez, I shouldn't sign that. So I've gone back and got my signature removed, as has others. I'm now saying to you, I don't know how many people signed it, but I challenge you to go find out how many people, find the people who did sign it, go back to them and ask them again and to see if they would really support this amendment being made on the upcoming ballot for 2020. Because I think you'll be very surprised that landlords will not benefit more than tenants from everything you just said, financially.
Thank you for your comment. Next up.
Joan MacDonald, but I'm speaking for Advocates for Affordable Housing and the League of Women Voters. And just to add some specifics to what was just said, there were more than 300 signatures for don't sign, in other words, withdraw my name from the petition. And clearly there were a lot more people that we didn't get to. We have some concern about what is the gray area of limited oversight. We feel that the council members actually don't understand or know a lot of the things that RHC has done. And so they're operating in a vacuum of lack of information or information that is way too early to make conclusions about. And certainly that's true in terms of the complaints about the onerous burden of petition process. And I think they need to understand that overwhelmingly the petitions that were filed by landlords were found in favor of the landlords, although possibly not at the exact amount that the landlords possibly asked for. Another thing that we are concerned about is we do not want the RHC to become an advisory body for a great many reasons. The code of conduct and removal of members can happen without becoming an advisory body. The RHC has a legislative role that none of the advisory bodies have, and in order for it to work, it must continue to have that legislative role. The oversight on high-level matters actually gives oversight to all matters. So it is not really advisable. The idea that council should decide when to suspend the RHC and CIFRA makes no sense at all, since in the current CIFRA, it's spelled out what might lead to the may suspend. Can I have 10 seconds more?
For you, Joan, yes, 10 seconds.
The flat rate flies in the face of the minimum wage ordinance that the city has that adds by CPI, not by a flat rate. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right. If there are no more public comments, we'll move on to the deliberation section for this agenda item. This is a tough one. We've already provided feedback, and I think after viewing the subcommittee's response, I'd like to propose that we try to have, I think, more specific and focused feedback this time. It's still a short list of items. Tim, if maybe this is a question to you, if you're amenable, maybe we would put it up to a straw poll for each item. What's the minimum that we can agree on that we would like to see placed? The reason I'd like to put that forward is because I think we do represent the community of Mountain View to some extent and have diverse opinions. And if we can agree on something, it makes it more likely that it's would eventually pass. And I think we want to spend our time wisely on the things that would be likely to pass as part of a ballot measure. And giving that feedback to the council will be helpful. So if that seems amenable to you and to the rest of the committee, I think maybe we try to move forward with that. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So maybe we'll try that, see where we get. And I think just going down the list of primary issues that Tim provided. Sorry, it looks like you have a question, Tim.
No, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
If you would like to, start with oversight, just a general discussion about that. Or however you wish to approach it, that's fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's work through that and see if go kind of issue by issue and see if we can get some sort of consensus so we can have some more focused feedback for the council. So we'll start with the first item, which would be the relationship between the RHC and the city council. Maybe we'll start at one end and kind of get opinions, and then try to put forward a motion or a statement that we'd be willing to get behind. So maybe I'll start with Julian.
So on this point, I think what we've tried to do throughout, running the RHC has been to look at the intent of the voters and also to look at the plain text of the CSFRA. It seems like on most of our decisions at one level or another, that's what we've done pretty consistently. And I think the text of the CSFRA is extremely clear that we're intended to be very insulated and independent. And I think when the voters voted on the CSFRA, they understood that that was going to be how the RHC functioned. And so I think oversight is too strong of a characterization, I think, of a relationship that makes sense given all that between us and the city council. I think, high-level consultations and are something that we can certainly engage in, and we can certainly seek out and ask for guidance on any variety of issues that come before us that might have particular interest to the community as a whole or for the city council. But I think the idea of giving up some of our authority when that would be contrary to what the voters intended and what the CSFRA expects from us is something that I think only can come by a ballot initiative where the voters have a chance to decide that issue. And if they want to have, if they want more oversight by the city council for us, then I think the voters will decide that, and I think that's great. But if not, I think then things should stay the way they were decided by the voters in 2016.
So just to clarify there, if it were part of a ballot measure and it were accepted, you'd be okay with that. But
I guess that's where we get into the nitty gritty a little bit about what specific oversight I personally think might be appropriate. And I can't say at this point. I guess I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say. I think it's just kind of a threshold issue. I think it's almost premature, but I guess I'd defer to everyone else, and maybe you can come back to me.
sounds good. Emily?
So I'm looking at this through a lens of, if council's going to put something on the ballot, it is a complete waste of our time if it doesn't pass. So in terms of looking at the relationship between the RHC and the city, a lot of that is fluff. Unless it's a clear improvement, it's not really necessary. Personally, I like the separate nature of what the charter affords us. I had the opportunity, I go to every single council meeting since 2014-ish. And the last council meeting, they got to go over work plans over their advisory committee, and I sat through that and watched them like gut a work plan of one of the advisory committees. I felt so bad for the HRC, because like half of their stuff, they're like, I don't think they should do that. I don't think they should do that. I would never want council to do that to us, so I'm grateful for that independence, plus the fact that we have our own staff affords us that independence. Now, things such as they are able to appoint us, and that is clearly designated in the measure. It's not clear whether they could remove us, and so that clarity would be helpful for, I don't know, bad behavior. That at least to have that clearly for them, and that I feel is an improvement, and that's why I was looking in that's why I look into something like that. Other than that, everything outside of that, the code of conduct doesn't necessarily need to be a charter amendment. And in terms of working together between the RHC and the city, we just need to be a little bit more creative with how we get to work with each other if they want to work with us better. Not by trying to establish dominance. So that's how I view in terms of the relationships between the RHC and the city. The only thing I think is worthwhile in terms of the ballot initiative is clearly stating that they could remove us. But other than that, nothing.
Quick question, actually, for staff. When we adopted the code of conduct, was there anything in there about removal? Or is that still, we haven't done a regulation about removal?
No, and I don't know that you really can adopt a regulation about the council removing you, because that's a council action. So the code of conduct doesn't address that.
Got it. So that, I guess another question, in your mind, that is something that would rise to the level of requiring, a ballot measure?
It's not clear under the CSFRA. I mean, the CSFRA is clear that the council appoints you, but then it also indicates that the RHC is independent of the city. So it's a bit of a gray area in terms of if the council wanted to remove an appointment. Given that they made the appointment, I think you can make the argument that they can remove their appointee. But, if somebody challenged that removal, there's potentially some lack of clarity and there might be litigation. So that's an area where there could be more clarity. I mean, right now, clearly the council can remove their appointees to advisory boards. But, it could be a pretty simple clarification in the CSFRA.
Okay, thank you. So Nicole, we'll move on to you.
So my thoughts on council and RHC interaction, I do like our autonomy. I think it's really important to maintain the autonomy. That being said, Julian brought up an interesting point that kind of got my wheels turning. You know, I think if the public wants to see more oversight of the RHC by the council, that may need to be its own pure ballot initiative, not mixed in and muddled up with everything else, where it gets to be too much for the general voter to be able to say, well, I like this, this, and this, I don't like that, that, and that, how do I vote? So I think, you know, to me, we should maintain our autonomy. I just think it's important. But I could see if the voters really wanted to see more council oversight, doing a ballot initiative later that addresses just that point.
How do you feel about removal?
You know, removal, I don't like the idea of putting it on the ballot. I think the beauty of appointments over elections can be that it does remove the appointees a bit from the electoral process. Pros and cons to that, of course. But I think that then giving a removal power in a ballot, I just don't think there's enough time to flush it out so that it's clean and it can't be used for any political pandering. So I don't love that right now. I think that just this whole concept of giving any oversight, including removal, would need to be its own ballot initiative if the public truly wants that, if that's what the public is looking for.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to Susan.
Well, I really agree with everybody. I mean, each of you brought up important parts. It also seems to me, I feel like this is almost a premature conversation because we don't know the outcome of the subcommittee and what the council will choose to take from the subcommittee. And it's going to take another couple of months. I mean, the process is they're going to have several more meetings, right? And they have to deliver the language by December 6th to get it on the ballot. One question for staff is, do you think it's realistic that they will come up with something that will go on the ballot other than the one that's already got all the signatures?
I think a lot will be determined tomorrow as we ask the council as a whole, some subcommittee items, but I think so. It is a city, a council work item to explore amendments to the CSFRA. So I do believe something will move forward. It seems like in the interest for the council.
I mean, I think that the voters, I think the people who put in all of the work to design the CSFRA, and then the voters agreed that it was a good thing and voted it through. I think that we haven't really given it a shot. I mean, we're still in its infancy. We're still deciding whether duplexes and mobile homes and probably things we haven't even thought of should be part and parcel of the CSFRA, and that, you know, we'll tweak it and maybe we'll add or we'll take things away. But I think that it's unfortunate that council seems to be very resentful of our autonomy, and that seems to be motivating a whole lot of this. And I'm sure there's a lot of pressure, you know, from different community forces going into wanting to get this thing done. I guess I just sort of feel like we seem to be in agreement. We want to maintain our independence and continue to do what I think the good work that we do and respond to community inquiries and petitions. And I'm sure that staff would love to, you know, streamline the petition process if it's possible. It seems like everybody's doing a pretty good job. So anyway, my feeling is we're probably going to revisit this a few times.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're generally think that modifying it is somewhat unnecessary, and I think to Julian's points, it was pretty clearly laid out in what the relationship was to be in the original ballot measure, and the people voted that in. I mean that is laid out in many cases in the CSFRA that we're supposed to be independent and of that nature. So I myself, in trying to get to a consensus statement, I guess, just to do it, I'm not sure how to run a straw poll here, but would people be supportive of on this agenda item, saying that we're generally unsupportive of modification of the fundamental, relationship between us and the council that's laid out already in the CSFRA, and maybe we don't have full support for this. I'm actually in support of, if they would like to have removal, in this ballot measure, if they do pass a ballot measure or put it forward, I don't think it'll be, or my personal view is that it wouldn't necessarily move it one way or the other if it said that they could have the right to remove individual members of the committee as they saw fit, since they do appoint us. I think I'd be generally in support of that, but I don't want to add that to break up what could be a unanimous support of generally saying that we're unsupportive of modifying this relationship. So to that, yeah, so first let's go with the statement, the first statement, that we're generally not supportive of modifying the relationship as it stands and as is laid out in CSFRA. We can kind of tweak that and write it with Tim and Anki, but how do people, anyone in support of that? Let's say aye. Aye, okay, that's unanimous support.
Can I ask for some
Sure.
clarification? So you mean you're not supportive of an amendment of the CSFRA with regard to changing the rental housing committee city council relationship? Or
Correct.
do you mean in general?
Just that piece,
Yeah,
yes.
gotcha.
That it's my view, and hopefully everybody sees nodding heads, it's unnecessary. It doesn't seem like it's serving a particular purpose, and was already laid out pretty clearly in the CSFRA as passed by the people. Okay.
And if
yeah, sure.
just to be a little more specific, just even council oversight in regards to these specific areas, units, persons, and just oversight in general, it sounds like also. Based on the
it's tough to
nature of the CSFRA and how the purpose.
I almost think this is a separate topic, actually, to say that the CSFRA, to give us, right now we do not, I believe, have the capability of changing redefining a unit.
You don't have the ability to change what's covered and what's exempt.
Right.
I mean, you have the ability to interpret, which you saw with the mobile homes, but you couldn't add units to what's covered, or you couldn't add exempt units.
Right. So I took this, and my listening to the council meetings, or the subcommittee meetings, was that they were debating whether to give us additional powers, and then they would have they would have approval of those powers. I don't want to put forward my opinion on that, because I do think it's a separate topic. We could, if people are, the rest of the committee would like to weigh in on that, we could. Which is to say, would you want a system where we could amend specific pieces of the CSFRA text, with then that being requiring approval from a majority or supermajority of city council, which I think is what they put forward, correct? Is that something that people, that members of the committee would like to weigh in on at this time?
I don't think we should go there. I mean, I think I think we're all in agreement that we want to keep it as is, our relationship, and I wouldn't want to muddy that.
That specifically, actually, one of the use cases was the duplex issue, though. That would solve the duplex issue, where multiple duplexes on multiple parcels, or at least that was my interpretation of where they were trying to get. But as it's stated here, it's much more broad ranging than that. So my personal thought, I guess I'll put it out there, that I didn't think if it's too broad, I think per some public comment, if it's too broad, it just wouldn't pass. If you said, now the RHC has, carte blanche to change almost any part of the CSFRA, that to me seemed like it would just be the nail in the coffin for the ballot measure. Sorry for not letting all of you weigh in before I give that, but as an alternative, we could in this piece, the first line item here, we could add another one. Maybe we want to add specific language about those duplexes, since that's the one issue we know of right now that would require changing the definition of unit. We could also make that a recommendation to the council. Emily, sorry, would you like to weigh in?
It's kind of awful because the way that staff has this laid out and the way they want us to answer is probably not the way we're going to answer this, so I'm so sorry about that. In terms of an overall concept, I'm really starting to think about, one, when it got put on the work plan in terms of council and their priority session and all that, and the sped up timeline because it needs to be done by December 6th because they're targeting March 2020. And so when it first came out that they wanted to do that one, I didn't like the idea in the first place, but we could look into what kind of improvements we could do. And if we are super targeted, we could probably come out with something great and really improve the CSFRA. Coming out of one RHC meeting and 3 council subcommittee meetings, it has been anything but focused and targeted. And that's not staff's fault. Quite honestly, I think staff has done an amazing job in targeting and focusing a lot of the concepts. But it seems to get more and more complex in such a short timeline deadline. And the more complex a ballot initiative is, the less likely it's going to pass. During the subcommittee meetings, the question was asked, what constituencies are actually going to support this? Who is asking for this? We were fortunate enough in our first meeting, we had members from the duplex community who were on multiple duplexes on a single parcel. That was great. We found a constituency. Mobile home parks, we found a constituency. Everything else, we haven't found anything. So any changes to the CSFRA that I would like our RHC committee, or no, that's committee, I guess at that point, but the RHC to support or help target for the council in general and the subcommittee, because I believe this is going to the council in general. I don't know if this report will go to the council in general. I think this is too much of a turnaround.
No, we will be reporting some, if not all, of the RHC input for tomorrow's council meeting. They specifically asked to poll the RHC about these specific issues.
Because the reality is, it does us no good, even if we have the best input and the amendments to the charter, and it doesn't get passed by the voters. So in terms of that the council decides a high level, yeah, that sounds great. And if we have more time to mesh this out and really think it through and have workshops on it or do a full workout of outreach, yeah, maybe we should look into that. Looking at our December 6th deadline, why? I don't think we should. So concept-wise, yes, that sounds great. Looking at the March 2020 deadline, I think it's wasting our staff time and wasting their staff time. When they did this in the priority session, I pulled up my notes from that because I sat through that meeting too. And that was priority goal 2.1. And in all the public comment, only one person spoke on that topic. Not necessarily topic, but on that goal, 2.1, which was modifications to CSFRA. Everyone wanted 1.2, I think, which was immigration, and then 1.9, which was anti-displacement. So I fail to see a constituency which will get this over the hump and actually get people to vote for it. And so in order for this to be, how do I say this, not a waste of everyone's time, I suggest that we focus and pretty much we can discuss some of these concepts, but I think it's not useful for the ballot initiative in December, for December 6th deadline.
To follow on with Emily's point there, I think, to your point, Emily, if we had the time to be tactical in applying this and really say, and with council, have city council say, with regards to duplex issues, with regards to mobile home issues, here are the precise ways we would modify the CSFRA. That could have benefit. However, giving carte blanche to edit things like units, persons, city general funds pass-through, and suspension to the RHC, even with city oversight, makes a moving target for landlords and tenants both. So as your RHC evolves, all of these concepts can then, if you don't write it, the ballot initiative quite properly, constantly evolve. So for both a landlord and a tenant, that's a moving target that's really stressful and doesn't improve upon anything. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
Okay. Maybe one way to kind of structure this feedback, I think, is to first, I do want to get a vote on the first two items that we said. So we have something on paper that we're giving to them on this agenda item. I think then we'll ask if anyone feels passionate about any details that's in this list that we see on the screen right now. So then we could decide whether if there's a majority. I feel like we could put that in as a subtext to say also, we feel like if there were very specific language about X item, we feel like that would be something we'd be supportive of. So to go back to our original vote, I think everyone was generally in agreement about the statement that we're not supportive of fundamentally changing the relationship between the two. And then I think regarding specific items, the first one would be removal. I guess, quick vote of who would be supportive of authorizing specific language for the council to put forward regarding the removal, their power to remove a member of the RHC. All in.
Authorizing anything, but we're putting in language?
That we would be okay, that seems, I guess we'd be saying that seems like an item that would, my interpretation of what staff is saying is that would be something, if they wanted to put it in, would make sense for it to be a part of the ballot measure. But if you're not supportive, you definitely don't have to vote. So I guess anyone in support of a removal language, I guess vote aye. So I will say aye. Looks like I'm the only one. So we're not going to put that on the list there, Tim. Okay. Sure, go ahead.
On the city general funds, my understanding is there was grave concern about the costs of the startup year or so, and that may be where the history of this concern about general fund use comes. It seemed, from what I was listening to in the subcommittee, there's very great concern that there might be legal suits that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we would go willy-nilly spending the city's money. And I wonder if maybe, Anki, you have said over and over how, the CSFRA pays for itself. And it seems like that hasn't gotten through to them. I just wonder if there's something that we could say about the use of funds, about the fact that we're not planning to misuse them.
Yeah, yes, you could. I think what I recall from the last subcommittee meeting is that, okay, to date, you were able to control the costs, but it's uncertain what type of litigation might come up in the future and whether or not the Rental Housing Committee will come to the City Council for extra funds. That was what was said.
But isn't that exactly why we've been trying to fund a sinking fund? And isn't that why we are very pleased, or at least I was very pleased, to see that we had actually made additional progress on that this year.
Yeah.
And we're more than halfway funded.
We have about $380,000 in our reserves. So, yeah.
So if we did want to say something around that, perhaps we could report to the city council our sinking fund budget so that they have more comfort around the fact that we would not be going into the city general funds. Maybe some level of reporting and sharing information might have value there, if others like that idea.
Any other comments on the general funds piece?
Hypothetically, if we get a mythical lawsuit for the RHC, doesn't City Council run the same risk of a mythical lawsuit that they don't know in the future for whatever their ordinance have? So I guess that was a redundant question, or what was that word called? A rhetorical question. So yeah, so I think most of this stuff, if we had more time, more thought put into working things out and don't have the December 6th deadline and not trying to make a hodgepodge, most of this stuff we could disregard.
All right. Jillian, any comments on the general funds line item?
No.
Okay. I think I would agree, I guess, in that a simple statement of we take our budget making seriously and we have X amount of funds for a rainy day in reserves. I'd be supportive of just saying that. And generally, we feel that it wouldn't be necessary to make it, to put anything into the ballot measure. I guess I would ask quickly if, just by nodding heads, whether that's something that people would be supportive of. All right. Great. So I had one item out of this list that I'd put forward, but I was wondering if anybody else had any others. All right. On the units, I actually would, if this is the time for us to give that feedback on the duplex definition, I think by December 6th, it could be reasonable to put together a very specific redefinition of duplex, put that into the ballot measure. Also, I don't think, again, that's going to move the vote either way, but it would make things easier on us by kind of taking care of the duplex issue. Sorry, I'm looking at Tim, but actually I'm saying it to the committee. If you feel like you'd be supportive of specifically addressing the duplex issue, I'd love to hear your comments.
I would be. I think that's a nice tactical maneuver where we could be very specific and give direction or give guidance to city council, to the subcommittee, that we'd like to see that addressed, not in a broad stroke of units, but specifically around duplex.
I agree. My only question is, on the chance that this will lose, does that damage our potential future choices? I mean, I guess we could then say, okay, well, it didn't pass, but we don't know that it had anything to do with duplexes. We can agendize that after March.
Good question for legal staff. Is a no vote on anything that gets put on the ballot, does that create legal precedent for someone to challenge our future decisions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you have the ability to interpret the CSFRA within its parameters, and you would retain that ability regardless of the vote.
Okay, Emily?
A legal question. So this specific case, we can't do that on our own. So this would have to go through a charter, correct?
Because of the way the exemptions are written, it's very specific, and it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room.
Okay. So I would support the specific language. And I guess what I'm hoping that all of us would aim for in the RHC is the direction that we're giving to council is specific And hopefully that will encourage them to be specific and clear and concise on this. So, did you want to do a straw poll on this, Matthew? Julian.
Yep, Julian.
Yeah, so I mean, I would generally support adding duplexes as something to be considered by the voters. I think one sub-issue we might consider, though, is whether to also include, the appropriate base year for considering duplexes in the ballot initiative versus ourselves enacting clarifying regulation on that point. I think there could be merits to both, but I think that's kind of a natural thing that's going to come up. Well, duplexes are covered. Okay, great. And now what is the appropriate base year to use or the timing to use? And if it's set forth on the ballot, then that's pretty clear, and I don't think we get ourselves into too much trouble. But if it's not clear, and then when we make a determination our own, that might be good because we actually know the issues better and the nuances, but it also makes us more of a target because of that. So I just think it's something that maybe a sub-issue we should consider.
All right, I think that's a good point. And now it's a slippery slope because now I'm remembering that we also, there was, our staff did ask us if we could clarify the in-law units, multiple in-law units on one parcel situation as well as the multiple duplexes on one parcel. So I guess, would everyone here be supportive of saying, coming up with some language that helps us deal with outliers, but not in a way that's going to reverse. I think if something's on this ballot that allows us to, gives us too much, as everyone has said and agreed with, too much leeway, then it's not going to be accepted because, of distrust in the community. And, which is valid. There will be different members of the RHC in the future, and you never know what's going to happen. So,
I think there was a discussion in our previous meeting. One suggestion would have been the CSFRA applies to properties with 3 or more units. Then you kind of take care of both issues at the same time.
okay. Are there any unintended consequences from that that we could think of? Or is there?
Well, I think Julian's comment is correct. If we're going to do that, we have to address what the base year is for those units because they have not been covered up till now. So we would, it's more than just a one sentence, but it can be done strategically, very carefully, and they could be covered.
How about this? What if the statement that we give to the subcommittee would be, we are supportive of an elegant way to define corner cases that are problematic, and we would like the freedom to, we would like the ballot measure or what's in the ballot measure give us the freedom to work out the details later. So the RHC would figure out what the base year is, or it gives us jurisdiction over more control in dealing with those corner cases separately from the CSFRA language as it is today. Was that too much?
I don't like the idea of giving us freedom later. We already have the authority. The question is whether the voters are going to take away that authority by agreeing with the council's recommendations, right? And I have a question about 3 units. Does that mean if there's one mother-in-law unit, that's going to remain exempt? So only 2 on a property will never be covered?
Yeah, so the current problem is if there's an ADU on the same property as a single-family home.
Right.
Because of the definition of the single-family home now becomes covered under the CSFRA. So if you say 3 units or more, if you have one ADU and a single-family home on one property, they're both exempt if you were to change that definition.
So you can't have the single-family home exempt and cover the ADU?
Well, that depends how you define the exemptions, but how they're currently defined, it confuses a lot of people, and it has some unintended consequences.
So all what are called companion units are exempt, regardless of how many
I know.
are on a property?
Live in one.
Right. Whereas, single-family homes would not necessarily be exempt if they're rented and there's a companion unit on it because of the way this is written. So that's where the lack of clarity comes in.
So I guess maybe I would put it forward we'll put it forward to a straw poll of if we trust that, or if we would give our support to staff trying to write something up that would deal with the corner cases that have already been brought forward, where there's gray area, to better define those areas.
Can we add on there and we request that clarity be given around the base year?
Yeah, I think that
needs to go together.
Yeah, if you're, I heard what Susan saying about giving us too much freedom. So maybe we just say the base year, and anything else in the next few days that staff figures out isn't as clear as it should be. I mean, maybe we just brainstorm this right now, but is there anything else besides base year that you think would be problematic in covering a new or setting a new definition?
No, I think that's sort of the trickiest part, and that we can come up with something.
Okay. All right. So I'll put that to the vote. Again, I think it is, we are supportive. The statement would be we're supportive of defining those corner cases and us having the responsibility of redefining the base year or within the ballot measure. Yes.
Are we looking at two separate votes? Because I was really liking the straightforward duplex case. And then are we doing a separate vote on the base year corner case issue? Are you putting the duplexes as a corner case?
Gotcha. Yeah, so the duplexes and as I'm hearing from Anki, the multiple ADUs on the same parcel, seems like there is an elegant solution for that, which is something along the lines of when 3 units are on the same parcel, it's covered. And then just also for that case, letting us reset the base year, or set the base year. So it wouldn't be the base year it's not the base year for all units, it's just the base year for that case. Yeah. Newly covered, yes. Great, yes. Anki's already getting good language there. I like it. Okay, so we'll put that to a vote. All in favor of putting forward that statement to the subcommittee? Aye. All right. Okay, making progress. Any other anything else from that list for item number 1? Okay, we will move on then to item number 2, the capital improvements.
There's more.
Yes, on oversight. Okay, gotcha. Sorry. So yes, to put forward those items, I'll give everyone a couple minutes to read through, and then if any of those rise to the level that you think it would deserve to be on the ballot measure, we can discuss. Sure, Emily, go ahead.
Okay, so if we're just going down this list, the first one is going to scare people no matter how you're going to write that. That's going to terrify people, mentioning how the CSFRA is going to get suspended. And when things are scary, they don't vote for it. So we're not going to even discuss that. RHC is an advisory body. We already said no. Non-residents to serve on the RHC. Whatever, no. But if we are clear that they are required to be part, it's mandatory for them to be part of the registry, I feel that that's something that we could only do with a charter amendment. Oh, no, we could require that without it? Oh, cool, I'm good with not going, not sending anything of this.
It just would be more clear and questionable if it were to be expressly mentioned in the CSFRA.
Okay. Anybody else on these topics?
The fourth one, express authority for mandatory registry, is that giving the council that authority to require registry?
Either one, either you or the city council.
And didn't we decide we weren't going to make it mandatory?
Okay, you can give a, we did cover that topic.
We discussed that topic a couple of times when it came up when we were discussing the database. We were going to keep track of how many people were actually voluntarily register. And that's where the end of this discussion was to date.
Any other feedback on that particular item, the fourth one?
I mean, the funny thing about this is, well, it's not really funny, but it's the interesting thing about this is I do like the idea of expressing authority for mandatory registration. If we put it on the ballot, it may actually get the landlords more against it. So, like I said, the priority is anything we want on this has to be something that that doesn't harm the other things from we want getting passed. So I'm okay with it not being included in the thing. Now, in terms of if we have the authority as the RHC, eventually that will be fun to talk about in another agenda item.
Sure, Nicole.
I would concur with that. I think that while I would love to see more registration happening, I do think we have the tools to already encourage registration and perhaps eventually mandate registration. And I like to think of it as an evolution. And I think when we were discussing the budget, or one of the agenda items previously, I mentioned this, I think that we don't have to mandate right away. We can use some incentivizing first and get people warmed up, get people on board, evolve that way. So I don't think it needs to be on a ballot. And everything else, just does not need to be on a ballot.
Yeah, I think I had, I recall having similar, kind of thinking similarly to what Nicole said. Maybe the only question I would put to staff, I know we do have the flexibility to require this if we wanted to. I think, are there any incentives that we had talked about that would need a ballot measure for us to be able to do that? So for instance, I think having different, maybe for members who are registered, they could have a different fee than from what other members pay every year. Is there anything that we mentioned that we couldn't do? Are there any ideas out there that if we wanted to incentivize them and use the carrot, not the stick, that we don't have the flexibility to do right now, and that we could ask council for maybe write in that flexibility?
Yeah, so we can do a separate topic on that in one of the future agendas.
Okay. But I guess right now, but that wouldn't go on the agenda, or that wouldn't go on the ballot, or we wouldn't be able to.
This question is, does this need to go into the CSFRA amendments or not? Do you recommend that?
Right, and I think I think what I'm hearing was that we have the flexibility to, make a lot of these choices ourselves. But is there anything that we want in the ballot to give us more flexibility from an instrumentation perspective? So. Something that we'd like to, if we came up with these rules to say, hey, we're trying to incentivize landlords to register, we don't want to make it compulsory, but we'd like to do this, this, and this. Specifically, specifically have different grades of fees among landlords. Can we do that today?
Well, the CSFRA allows different fees between partially covered and fully covered units, but it doesn't allow additional differentiation. So that might be a problem if you wanted to create some sort of incentive or reduced fee for people who register.
Got it.
But we can do a late fee for people who register late.
That's the stick, yeah. I prefer to go with the carrot first.
If I may,
Okay.
just, there has been discussion about this good actor landlord, that something to consider, but.
I see. Okay. I guess I'll there's differing opinions, it sounds like. I don't actually know how to put a statement together for this. It sounds like we don't necessarily think it's necessary to write this, specifically the mandate, into the CSFRA, but some of these underlying levers that we'd like to pull, we'd like more flexibility there. But I don't think we have enough right now to make a focused recommendation to the subcommittee, unless someone would like to say they disagree. Okay. Actually, Anki, yeah, I mean, if the language doesn't need to be finalized until December 5th, maybe we do have a specifically talk about that item in a future agenda around the instruments that we could use to incentivize, or a late fee, if if that's where we're leaning. Okay, so I think we've covered now topic number 1. Number 2 is specific capital improvements. So I'll give everyone a moment to read through this one, and then same, I think, bring forward anything you feel passionate about that would be necessary to have in a ballot measure that we could recommend to the subcommittee. Okay, and again, I think on this one, council's asking for, are we supportive of the concept in general, which is allow, the specific petition, expedited petition for capital improvements that's outside of the current process for a fair return? And then do we also want to make sure that they include specific guidance around what those expedited processes can be that we have jurisdiction over? Any thoughts to begin? First, generally, are people supportive of an expedited petition process being part of the ballot measure?
I am. I think that some level of streamlining, more like from what I understand Alameda does, with the pre-approval process and then the document review for the post-approval, is not a bad idea. For just specific capital improvements, I might have on the next slide some differing of opinions on the list there, but I am generally supportive of some level of streamlining with a pre-approval and a post-approval process.
And just to clarify, that's for the fair return petition.
No, that's for just recapping capital improvements.
Okay.
Not for an MLA.
Got it. Okay. Anyone else regarding capital improvement expedited petition?
I feel
Sure.
like this is an...
Sorry,
Oh,
Emily.
I'm sorry.
Emily.
Okay. So I'm very mixed on this. This is where the specificity really matters. And this is where you get to a point where not enough a specific, God, I hate that word, but if it gets not specific enough, it will sink this initiative. And I'm very cognizant of that. Even if we get specific on this, there's no, there is a chance that it will still sink it too, depending on how people feel in whole how the measure is going to go. Because this is a clear, I feel like the specific capital improvements is something that is clearly beneficial to one party. And so without a balancing out, or at least a clear specificity, gosh, I hate that word, that this will cause more people to want to sink it. And it's such a cop-out for me to be like, I don't know if we should even weigh in unanimously on this or even a majority on this, because having a capital improvement process, I've seen that in other jurisdictions. So we know that there is a model that we can follow. And quite honestly, as we do, the big genesis of one of the major issues when it came to the modification of the CSFRA is we have the seismic retrofits, and we don't want dead tenants. So it would be nice to have like those are meant to be those retrofits actually happen. Even though we make them mandatory, there is still questions because they will get added. They are, because of our law already allows for them to put it into our fair rate of return process. Fundamentally, so there are two fundamental things that I believe, and I feel like as we get more specific in terms of the capital improvements thing, fundamentally, I do think that a capital improvement process is not necessarily a bad thing. But the other fundamental is, I believe our fair rate of return petition process currently as it is actually very good as it is. So those are two conflicting narratives, and how we actually work this out, and whether I know that a specific capital improvement change has to go through the charter. That's my understanding. Now, there are wiggle rooms of ways that we could make that a little easier, but it's still fundamentally a fair rate of return process. And staff has done a wonderful job of making that, improving that since our very first iterations. And they constantly iterate. So I don't believe, I guess that's a bad word, I don't feel that the fair rate of return process will forever be a, what was the word that a lot of people have used it, like an overbearing process, as what we have gotten from our initial feedback about our petitions. And our staff has worked continuously very hard to ensure that it's not. And they are constantly working to find ways to improve it. And I believe in that process. So this is where I'm a bit split in terms of the specific capital improvements, because one, I want to give specific direction to council. Two, I don't know what that specific direction is. Clear as mud.
All right. Regarding, I mean, to focus in, regarding the seismic retrofit in particular, would you be amenable to a specific statement that allowed for an expedited petition process for that outside of the fair return?
I think at this point, I am open to only seismic retrofit.
Nicole?
Would you, Emily, be supportive of language in the charter that allows the RHC at its sole discretion the flexibility in the future to streamline for capital improvements only, as opposed to letting council have that control?
my problem with that is the definition of streamline. I remember I had this conversation with a council member, and he spoke about, it's like, I would like a more streamlined process, and that was one of the things that he wanted. And I was like, what does streamline mean to you? And he thought like over the counter was the word he told me, and I'm just like, no, absolutely not. But even if it's up to the RHC, I feel like there needs to be more backing to it with the law, like something that even with the RHC, this is expanding a power to the RHC. And I was mentioning this before with Matthew. So like if you have the general sentiment of council here, the general sentiment of RHC is probably here, which is unfortunate, but a reality. And I worry that that will sink it. So we are working with a whole bunch of stuff, and even the seismic retrofits, you can make a case for it. The question is who's going to make this case for it? And that's when we go through all of this, is like, where's the constituency that is going to support this? Who are the people that are going to give up what I like to call their time and their treasure to make this initiative pass? And it's not easy to win elections. When council talked about doing this, they're like, on their own time, they're going to work on this. They have full-time jobs, they have their council job, and then they're going to campaign. Which I really hope that's not the expectation for us. But so when we talk about what we're adding in, I feel like seismic retrofits, I see that we can make an argument for it, but that is really, we are starting to deal with a very dangerous, we are risking not passing anything at all beyond that.
All right. Julian?
So I don't think we're going to get a unanimous opinion on this one. So I mean, I like the idea of expedited petitions over the counter. I think that idea actually makes a lot of sense to me. In terms of eligible capital improvements, I actually think as much as possible should be eligible. And I think logistically, what makes sense to me is, given the time constraints that we have, it seems very difficult, if not impossible, to come to some kind of agreement as to what exactly we would want covered, and then to have the subcommittee also be on board, and then to kind of present that all on the ballot. It seems like a bit challenging, and I think an alternative is to simply have an initiative that gives us the authority to make whatever determinations we want about capital improvements. And then we have that authority to use going forward, and we might decide that, you know, seismic retrofits are something that we want to have eligible. And it seems like that might be the case. And there might be other things as well that we would find eligible with our authority, and other things that we would not find eligible. But I think the cleanest way to do it would be simply to ask for that authority to use our discretion going forward with the knowledge base we have to make that determination, rather than trying to cobble something together pretty quickly, which I think at the end of the day is not going to be really what we want and what the council wants, and then doesn't give us the flexibility that I think we properly should have on this issue. Because, for example, the seismic retrofits, for those of us that don't follow, you know, earthquake news a lot, this is probably not an issue that maybe 5 years ago we would have seen on the horizon as something that might be worthy of capital improvement. But now we see this and we say, well, this is a perfect, or some of us might think this is something that's appropriate for it. And likewise, something else might come up in 2 to 3 years that we don't see now that might be an appropriate topic for a capital improvement to be included. And I think giving us the discretion and the authority to make that determination is the cleanest way to go about this.
Okay, Susan?
I agree. I mean, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, you know, they were talking about very specific things like roofs and windows and, for sustainability. And it doesn't seem like a ballot initiative is the appropriate place to create the checklist. I mean, it seems to me that takes a lot of research and comparing what other districts, I was really happy to see the comparison sheet that the staff developed. But, yeah, I agree with Julian. We need to maintain discretion, and through our experience, we'll develop that information.
But currently, we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff and our council, we don't have the discretion to do so, do we? We cannot do anything but a fair return for capital improvements.
With that, so the only allowable basis for a rent increase in an individual petition, it's got to be based on fair return. So you could come up with a petition process that addressed capital improvements. The capital improvements also have to be necessary. So there are some restrictions there. So you could come up with something, but we have to tie it back to fair return. Whereas what you saw in the information is some jurisdictions have just a completely separate capital improvement petition process. It's not tied to fair return. It's tied to, did you install the capital improvements? Do they fit the definition of capital improvements? How much money did you spend? What's the amortization, et cetera? So that you don't have the ability to do.
All right. So my take on this one, I do think this is, or I have been leaning towards this being something that would really fit for the ballot measure. I get concerned about if we have to go through, if it is mandated that they have to have seismic retrofits without something separate. I could see our budget just getting blown up by having too many petitions that have to go through the full process, 50 pages of fair return documentation that needs to be included. So that's a primary concern for me. I would definitely be supportive of at least for seismic retrofit. So the way based on the feedback, the way I'd structure this question or statement, recommendation to the subcommittee would be first we vote on if we think that seismic retrofit, it should be specifically laid out in a ballot measure that we could create an expedited petition process for that. Then I think there's also support for, but I'm not sure if it doesn't sound unanimous, but maybe a majority of, giving us the flexibility in the future to lay out other, reasons for expedited petitions as they come up, maybe even something that's just necessary for compliance, as stated here, or extending the useful life of the property. Personally, I think I agree with everything in the eligibility rules, except when you say just benefits tenants, I think like benefits tenants and the community. I feel like sidewalks and things like those, I don't see those as being something the landlord's putting in to raise rents. I think like you could just have general upkeep for and I think I heard someone say that safety and that makes sense. So maybe then it is covered. But the general language of benefits tenants or exclude luxury, I think then you're even getting into more gray area. What's luxury? I agree with them in general, but it seems like you could get hamstrung again by something that we can't foresee. So that's just my personal opinion. So I think I'd put forward first to see if we can get perhaps unanimous agreement that a statement about we do believe that there's the necessity to add into the ballot measure adding the ability for us to come up with capital improvement rules for a seismic retrofit as an expedited petition process. A lot of words there, but I think everyone gets it. So we'll put that to a vote first, just seismic retrofit. All in favor? All right. Okay, so unanimous. So then the one that I'm not so sure about, but I'll put it out there. Yes. I think that was within, for the seismic retrofit, yes. I think everyone agreed? Nodding heads, okay. So now, for the second one, just giving the RHC in general, writing that into a ballot measure, that we would get to write or develop new expedited petition processes for different capital improvements at our discretion. And I'll adopt the eligibility requirements that they have here, actually, as part of this. The guiding principles, yes. And maybe I'll try it first without the specific categories and guiding principles, and that's actually more flexible than the more specific one. So all in favor of that statement. Sorry, the restating, providing the RHC with the flexibility to adopt regulation for additional capital improvement categories as we see fit.
Expedited review.
With, I think expedited was in there, I think so. But yes, that would be part of it. And it's an expedited process outside of fair return. Only it had to be adopted by, a majority of the rental housing committee. All in favor of a statement in support of that to the subcommittee. All right, 4 out of 5. Okay, so I think we'll just note that to the subcommittee. And we're moving right along. Okay, all right, we'll see how the next one goes. If we can put that up on the screen there. Or, sorry, Anki, do you have what you need for those 2 items that we've gone over so far? Or Tim, too?
Yeah, I think so. Just to be perfectly clear, the RHC wanted an expedited process outside of fair rate of return for solely seismic retrofits. That's
we were unanimous on that.
Yes. And then secondly, develop flexibility to adopt regulations to add capital improvement categories as the RHC sees fit outside of the fair rate of return.
That's right. And we were, I would note that we were 4 out of 5 on that one.
Majority.
Majority,
RHC, excuse me.
Right.
Okay.
We'll leave it there.
And you had mentioned you wanted to fold in those guiding principles as part of. Was it dialed it back?
My interpretation was we would pass it without that page. The 4 out of 5.
Okay.
Would agree with it without that page of things, but that's up to the council whether they want to adopt those or not, right? But we didn't necessarily think that was necessary.
Okay. All right. Very good. No other.
Okay.
Principles or parameters.
Sure. Go ahead.
Clarifying question. A lot of the stuff I'm just like, no. Is that like registering as like, we don't want council to touch that? Or is that like, we're not giving council feedback? That's a clear distinction.
No, and some of these things, for example, previously you had discussed certain things about the RHC relationship with the council, the oversight and staff can report. It was a unanimous or very strong no to many of those things.
Okay.
That can be reported back to in just that discussion about relationship.
Okay. So, but like in the, I don't remember, it was like 2 slides ago or something like that. I'm just like, nope. Is that feedback going to council, or is it going to council as we're not giving feedback? Does that make sense?
If the RHC felt strongly with affirmative or just a strong no in regards to all those aspects, then that will be taken to the council.
I think,
Were we clear on that?
Yeah, I think everyone, give me your feedback, but I think if we voted on something, we would like that to be the only feedback. And I think just to keep it focused, any individual statements that you want to record, you can definitely put that in an appendix or something. But I would like this to be in bold, the ones that we made group decisions on. It's because I think it is important to try to focus the issues on what we think is going to pass. I think that's the question that we're asking here. Implicit in our ask is we think that the things that we're pointing out rise to the level that they would require a ballot measure and deserve one.
Okay, so stepping back, the RHC did say, they voted unanimously that they're not supportive of fundamentally changing the CSFRA in regards to council oversight. That was very clear, so that will be what is reported to the council.
Okay. All right. Moving right along, two more. The next one is the annual general adjustment. At issue that we could discuss is either maintaining the current AGA, setting a fixed AGA percentage, something like 5%, or authorizing additional AGA increments for good actors. Think about that, and if you believe that any of those rise to the level of deserving to be on the ballot measure, then let's discuss.
And just to clarify, the subcommittee was not unanimous, or there was no majority opinion since they were split on this issue. This is one of the items that they wanted the council to weigh in on, but this is an opportunity for the RHC to provide their input in this, about this topic also.
Sure, Nicole.
I would like to weigh in that we should maintain the current AGA or do some percentage of CPI, but not set a fixed percentage. And the whole good actors thing, I do risk and compliance for a living, and I don't pat people on the head if they follow minimum standards. So, I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it. So if we want to incentivize, that's one thing, but putting that on the backs of a tenant doesn't make logical sense to me. I think that's where we need to talk about incentivizing, not raising rent to reward those who live up to minimum standards. Because if you're a quote-unquote bad actor, that means you're violating the law. And so I just don't pat people on the head for violating laws. Like saying, oh, good, you didn't violate all the laws. That's awesome, way to go.
All right. Anyone else like to weigh in? Emily?
Oh, yes. So number 2, I think, is a wonderful way to waste everyone's time by putting that in the ballot initiative. There's like that is the ultimate, like, this will kill this ballot initiative. So I believe in maintaining the current AGA. What was fascinating is early on, I think they've corrected themselves since then, but someone mentioned that the whole CPI thing was confusing, and I don't think they were really talking about the AGA. I think they were confused about our fair rate of return CPI issues. And then somehow that got translated to the AGA. So I'm maintaining the current AGA. I feel is probably the best way to actually not sink all the work we're putting into this. And the good actors thing, I think, just complicates that.
All right. Julian, or?
I would maintain the current AGA.
Me too.
All right. So, I mean, I actually feel the same. I feel like it's a poison pill to do any. The first CSRA was very clear about what the AGA should be, and that was voted in by the people. So I don't think there's any ambiguity there. So I would also maybe all in favor of. We believe that the current language was accepted by the voters and would complicate a ballot measure. Anyone in support of that statement? Aye. Okay, great. So you have everything you need there, Tim? Okay. All right, last one. Regulation for mobile homes. This will probably be a little bit more discussion here. The concept, just trying to think about the options that were laid out. And then I think there are other options that have been floated regarding what we could do here and what we could recommend. Yes, thank you for the second page. Are any of these, sorry, I thought I saw a question here that was regarding, or similar to, that would cover mobile homes, no? No, okay. Okay, all right, so we'll just start the discussion here. I think put forward something that you feel like would rise to the level or make sense for the ballot measure, and we'll discuss.
Didn't we cover this when we said we wanted to have,
So that is, well, this will be a question for staff maybe for clarification, but if we had on the first page, if we had the flexibility to change the definition of units, I think that could be a way then that we are enabled or given the tools to deal more specifically with mobile homes. I can offer my initial opinion there is that I think you're still beholden to the rest of the CSFRA, so there isn't the flexibility. I think everything else would stay the same. So CPI, vacancy decontrol. When we went through this a couple years ago with staff, there are a lot of line items where we were going to mark out certain pieces of the CSFRA or replace them or overwrite them, but then there were also still other pieces that were we couldn't change. And I guess I want to get opinions first, I guess, from everyone else before I put forward mine. But if you could say here that you're supportive in general of an ordinance, I think what we had talked about last time was whether we thought it should be an ordinance or part of the ballot measure. Now, I think the options are becoming more clear because of timing. It sounds like City Council would not be able to get an ordinance prior to the ballot measure going out. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
Sorry. Sorry. So the now first time, Anaki, keep me straight here. We had the question that was put in front of us was, do we think it was more deserving of mobile homes to be dealt with in a ballot measure versus an ordinance?
Yeah.
And we had given the feedback.
Yes, and then you also said, well, the majority thought an ordinance would be a good idea if that could be implemented at the same time as the charter amendment. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's where we were last time, and now I think what may have changed is that doesn't seem like that would coincide, or at least be ready by March.
That's true. That would be a really heavy lift to have an ordinance ready by March.
Yeah, so now they're bringing it back, and we can offer any, as we have with everything else, recommendations for whether this should go in the ballot measure, or if you have other suggestions about an ordinance or a way that they could offload some work to us. I think any of those are on the table. So I'll leave it there and open it up for comments. Sure.
Chris, always have lots of opinions regarding mobile home parks. I was on the losing end of this vote. We won't rehash that again because we'll never stop talking. My concern right now, as this waffling of mobile homes and the idea of the charter amendment, I felt that was like the easiest way that we could address this. My concern is because council has been waffle balling the mobile home parks since 2016, when the ordinance was, not the ordinance, when the charter amendment was first put, they came to the city council and they're like, we don't know if it's gonna be covered under the Measure V. And so 2 years later, Measure V passes and the mobile home residents go back to city council and like, we don't know if it's gonna be under Measure V. Fast forward 2 years later, the RHC votes that it's not, to my chagrin. But then I don't want this to come back to city council when they take this up in fall 2020. I think that's when it's in the work plan.
Estimate is January of 2020.
Oh, January 2020, so it's a little better. I don't want this to be like how we put this in the ballot measure or even discussing it for the ballot measure to be a reason for council being like, well, we don't know what's going to happen with this ballot measure, so we should hold off on this, because I really can't stand the idea of doing that to the mobile home residents. So if they want to just address it via city council ordinance, great. If they think that it should be under us, great. Let's work that out and hash that out. The worry I have is, do we need to put it in the ballot initiative, whether or not they are covered and not covered kind of thing? Because that will make things clear and less likely for council to waffle it. But it's also another way that this could sink. And if it's like, you could do, like I said, you could do the best ballot initiative that you want. It's worth nothing if it doesn't pass. And that is my concern. Now, what's the answer for that? I'm not sure. All I know is mobile home residents deserve protections, and I will trust in staff or my colleagues and what they think the best path for that is going to be. Or even our legal counsel, if you have any ideas about that, that would be great.
About what's going to pass?
What would be the safest course of action to getting protections for mobile homes?
I'm not sure that we do have a clear opinion. I mean, I think a city council ordinance is the quickest and, most effective way of doing it. But the city council has to pass an ordinance to do that. So.
Could I just ask on that point? So if, how would it function if there was an ordinance? How could an ordinance bring the mobile homes under our jurisdiction without amending the CSFRA?
Well, that's one of the questions that the council subcommittee had, is if they adopted an ordinance that had mobile home rent control, could they delegate to the RHC the implementation and administration of that ordinance? It's not clear. That could be an amendment that would be put into the ballot measure to make it clear that they could delegate certain things to the RHC that are of similar nature to what you do. So that's an option. The other option is they could do an ordinance and have somebody else administer it. So.
Right, so the city council could administer the program on its own, or the city could, in theory.
They could administer it with staff and not have a separate, there's options. I don't think they've gotten to that level of discussion.
Would it be fair to say that the cleaner option would be an amendment because you wouldn't have that issue?
Well, I think you could put in an amendment. One of the things that was discussed at the subcommittee was amending the CSFRA to make it clear that the council could delegate certain things to the RHC, so that should they adopt mobile home rent control by ordinance, they could then delegate it to you all to administer.
Along those lines, could they adopt an amendment to the piece of the ballot measure to give us the flexibility to create kind of a new class or a new category of unit that has different rules than other units? So so for one thing, the fee, right? Like let's throw that out there. If we wanted the fee to be different among mobile homes and park owners, and that to just be a different structure, is that something we have like?
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility of what they could put into the ballot measure if they want to amend it. So they could put into the ballot measure what you're suggesting, that there's more flexibility on the fee. They could put into the ballot measure that mobile homes are part of what's covered in the CSFRA, but leave it up to you to come up with the regulations. They could put in some flexibility to give you the ability to determine whether they're covered, but you have that right now. So I think, there's a lot of options as to what they can do. I think there just has to be a decision of how they want to proceed.
Sure, Emily.
So I guess this goes back to the question, what is the cleanest, most specific way we could direct council on this? I guess that's what I would like to get a little bit more, because we know council's looking at an ordinance. We think that council wants to do an ordinance and protect the mobile home park. So what is the clear and specific feedback that we could give to council to encourage this?
Well, we'll get a little more feedback, and then I think we could try to pull together where there's consensus.
I'm kind of ambivalent on this because I think there may be, political strategies that by including the mobile home coverage in the initiative, there is a sense that will bring votes to the initiative. But I don't know that means that that will result in long-term coverage for them. I'm also concerned that if it's a separate ordinance, then the city has to set up a separate bureaucracy and a fee schedule, and that more staff time would be required. So that's why I'm not sure whether we should support including it. I'm really not sure.
Nicole?
I can see both sides of it. I think I could support addressing via city council ordinance if we put some language in there around speedily finalizing the ordinance or something so it doesn't waffle forever. One of the things that does give me pause, though, is assigning the implementation and administration to the RHC. Yes, we can set up different categories with different rules and different triggers. The more complex you make categorization and supervision of the categorization and administration of the categorization, the more you blur the lines and the more unwieldy it becomes to administer. So I think we need to be mindful of how we say what we want our role to be if we're not going to have it in the charter. If we're going to have it as an ordinance where there'll be different terms, and then we're charged with administering those terms, I don't know, I see some overlap there. And then if we get into the master tenant subtenancy arguments, and I don't know, I see it going down a rabbit hole. I don't know, I think maybe this goes back to the units discussion from the first set of slides, and really, we're thinking about different types of units we see in 2019, but will those be the same units we see in 2049? Will those be the same units we see for, things will evolve. Are we boxing ourselves in because we're trying to address the issues we've already seen? And is that what we want to do, or do we want to give some flexibility to the RHC and the charter to address ongoing evolution of what units look like? And maybe that's where this lies. I don't know. I don't think that helps, but.
I do want to clarify that I think that it's overdue that mobile homes be covered. And I don't think it really requires a whole new set of regulations. I mean, whatever we need to do to make it legal and permanent, I would advocate for. I just strategically don't know if the ballot initiative is the place for that, as opposed to us tweaking our existing system. I think that's much cleaner. I don't think that the council thinks so.
All right. Yeah. So I think at some point I've had similar opinions to what everyone's expressed on the committee. I think where I've landed recently is, well, first we all agreed that generally speaking we thought mobile homes, deserved to have similar protections. But I think what informed the initial decision by the Rental Housing Committee was that if you applied all the rules that are in the CSFRA that are more intended not for space rents but for rents of individual units, that it was just kind of too blunt of an instrument to really create a fair and balanced system between park owners and as space renters. So at least that was the feeling at the time. So now we're in a position where we do feel like they deserve regulation. We recommended that it be ordinance at the time. The original decision was intended to say, City Council, this is something that you have jurisdiction over. We are, kind of granting you that jurisdiction by saying it's not in our jurisdiction. And then now it's kind of coming back again. I think there's some question, and now I'm realizing that I'd kind of prefer it to be that we control our own destiny. So if they were to come up with an ordinance and then say that we have to implement it, that seems to me to be the worst of both worlds, actually. Where they're forcing something upon us that they've created. I'd rather, with our knowledge and staff and background, that we'd be able to come up with something that's fair by looking at all jurisdictions and have plenty of time to do so, as opposed to something maybe that was rushed through. So. I think we have a lot of differing opinions. I'm trying to bring something together, but regarding Julian's point about what's the cleanest way forward now, seeing the options that we see, I am leaning towards it if we could find a way to create a new subcategory that's an addition. So again, I think when it comes to poison pills and things that would sink this ballot measure, I think it's saying the RHC gets to say what units are and what AGA is and redefine pretty much anything. I think that's not going to fly. But I do think we have a measured approach with more specific scope to say, the RHC has the flexibility to create new categories, define them, the flexibility to define them, and that are not currently under jurisdiction. And then different rules for that. So let's say the fee, or you wanted to change what happens to vacancy decontrol. I mean, I think vacancy decontrol in these situations is very different because there's ownership there. So, one thing that we discussed at the time was if there's no vacancy decontrol, then the prices as they are now of selling a mobile home when you transfer them stay very low. In the opposite, if there is vacancy decontrol, that's the opposite. When there is vacancy decontrol, prices stay very low. When there's no vacancy decontrol, then you're locked into a space rent in perpetuity between owners. And certain jurisdictions I've heard do like a one-time, let's say 10% adjustment or something. I'm just throwing out kind of what I've heard about what different jurisdictions do and things that there were several areas where we couldn't change what was in the CSFRA to tailor it to this, specifically to mobile homes. So what I'd propose is that we recommend to council that maybe if we have the power to add a new subcategory, and I'm looking at legal staff here, if this makes sense, to define for any new subcategories, that we could then tweak the existing elements of the CSFRA, be that fees, AGA, vacancy decontrol, things of that nature. Is that feasible?
So I want to be clear. So what you want is the ability to add to what are covered units, but with flexibility as to how you apply the rules to those covered units?
Yes.
I mean, we can certainly put something like that in a ballot measure.
Okay.
That works. I mean, I don't know how the council will feel about it, and we'd have to think about how we drafted it, but I think there are ways to do it.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I think it might be beneficial is that we would definitely put it on our working list of things to go through. I've heard council not necessarily jump at the chance, I think, to administer certain cases with it. They'd rather, you know, when it comes to not monetization, capital improvements, amortization over time, right? They made it clear they don't want to be the decision makers, whether it's 20 years or 15 years or anything like that. They want to put that in our plates. I think this could be something similar where it's on the ballot measure. It gives us freedom to make those decisions, and then we come back and have it on our working list. When they would do something, a process that's very similar, I think, and make it an ordinance. And again, I'm talking a lot here, but I'm trying to get clarity, I think, on what's the difference between an ordinance where they have complete control and giving us control to essentially make an ordinance within the CSFRA to cover mobile homes and
Well, you
administer it.
can't adopt ordinances. Only the
Right,
city
right.
council can adopt ordinances. You can adopt regulations to implement the CSFRA. So,
Yep.
you know, they can give you authority to adopt regulations within certain categories in terms of, I mean, which is essentially what you have right now. You have the CSFRA and you have authority to adopt regulations to implement the CSFRA. So you can't go beyond the boundaries of the CSFRA and take on new things. But, you know, you have authority to interpret it. And, you know, right now, the CSFRA says it covers all units unless they're specifically exempt. So you have authority unless it's specifically exempt to cover.
But not, it sounds like then actually an ordinance, you're kind of suggesting an ordinance might be the better way to go. Because we wouldn't, we have an exempt, non-exempt, but not necessarily the ability to tweak certain elements within, let's say I mean, we may not do it, but the AGA, right? Like if you wanted to say, okay, for mobile homes, it's going to be 125% or 60% of the.
Right, I mean, you couldn't do that because the AGA language is very specific in the CSFRA. The AGA is whatever the CPI is, you know, not less than 2%, not more than 5%. You don't have a lot of discretion.
Right.
In that area.
And
But you do have discretion in other areas that, you know, as we talked about when we talked about mobile homes, that you do have discretion to adopt regulations that would fit within mobile homes.
Would it be possible for council to give us more flexibility there? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to think about, like, what do we want more flexibility to do, I guess. I mean, so I guess the question back is, what are you feeling you're constrained in that you can't do?
It's been a couple of years, but we did, I
Right.
think we had a list at the time of things when we were going through the red lines of items there that we just felt boxed in. And Julian and Emily were there. But, you know, short of going through that list, is there a way to, in the time that we have, or time that council has before December 6th, to write something that would be specific enough that would allow us to kind of like the flexibility to revisit those items, go through them, write regulation? With a ballot measure to the CSFRA. I feel like at the time, the decision was that the current CSFRA was limiting in that regard.
I mean, I think we would want to go back and look at the issues at the time that we were looking at mobile homes to see where we thought, you know, amendments to the CSFRA might have been more helpful. I honestly can't remember.
I know, I'm kind of in the same spot. I keep bringing up, you know, like it's definitely not the AGA that we were looking at, but I know we had several bullet points that as we went through, we felt less and less comfortable interpreting that. And I'm just feeling now like if there's flexibility, that's where I'm at. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I think what you're struggling with is that there's like three types of law that we are essentially like messing with on here. We have the charter amendment law, which if you think about it as like a building, the charter amendment law is like steel. By going in and messing with it, we're gonna have to get like welders, riveters. It's a more significant undertaking to change that, but it's something that's supposed to be like unchanging almost. Not necessarily unchanging, but like it's a significant, it is the foundation, not the foundation because now I'm mixing metaphors, sorry, but it's the steel. City council is like the ordinance. They're dealing with like the plywood and glass, and that's the building. We are essentially like pouring bits of cement into the steel frame. And so as we are dealing with the mobile home parks, it's some things I think we could find consensus on is, I do believe that we could find consensus that that the mobile home parks is, I'm getting us to some kind of vote, because this is going to be really complicated. I feel that we have a majority that we do believe that mobile home residents should have similar protections that were granted to the people with the CSFRA. The differences that we've had about this was the actual implementation questions. One thing's, because yay, I guess the three of us were there, you were concerned about the vacancy decontrol. And the funny thing is in the measure, we have vacancy decontrol to the maximum allowed by state law. Is that some kind of language? So therefore, since mobile home parks don't have vacancy decontrol or state law limiting that, because that was limited by Costa-Hawkins, which doesn't cover mobile homes. So suddenly mobile home parks don't have essentially vacancy control, or we don't know. Or is that unclear?
Well, I think there was also mobile home residency law, which in some
Yes.
cases usurped what we could do. And then there was state law. And anyway, perhaps the proposal, maybe the proposal isn't workable of having maybe what I want to put on the table was asking council to put something on the ballot that would give us the more flexibility to add regulation within CSFRA for a new category, but that doesn't sound workable.
Well, no, I mean, as I said, I think it is workable. I think the real issue is what is the goal we're trying to accomplish? If you want the CSFRA to cover mobile homes, that's doable. We can put something in this ballot measure that would cover mobile homes and work through any issues that creates. But it sounds like it's not quite that. It's something less specific than that. And that's where, we need guidance. I mean, we can draft anything, but we need guidance.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
I really hate to do this to you. And as we are delving more into the weeds, is it a possibility? Because we are remembering some of the setbacks and the concerns when we were dealing through this. One was the vacancy control, finding a way for the CSFRA to address that. That's worth digging into the steel, essentially. Mobile home residency law. I believe, Matthew, your concern was the pretzeling that we had to do in order to make that work. Is there something that we can look at that makes it less uncomfortable? And that's we're gonna have to go back in time and figure that out, unfortunately. And so in terms of like a vote, because personally, I view that the worst case scenario is that we go through another 5 years without giving mobile home residents protections. But you brought out the second worst outcome, where the city council, without really understanding, the city council passes a law that is difficult for us to implement, yet still expect us to implement. And that's like the second worst scenario. And we would like to prevent that too. Personally, I feel it might be better if we actually do it ourselves, but if we do that, then we do have to address the uncomfortable pretzel parts in the steel. And I'm not entirely sure how we can do, what.
If you want to give feedback to the city council with regards to your concerns with regard to an ordinance, you can add the language that you just gave, like, can you, if you're going to trust us with the implementation of an ordinance, how far can our input and recommendations count when you are starting to adopt an ordinance?
Oh, that's good. All right, so I have three possible votes. One is a vote hoping that we direct to council that we want similar protections given to apartment residents of Measure B to be given to mobile home residents. So that's one straw vote. I could do this one at a time, but I'll list all three right now. The second one is that we would like the flexibility of a city council ordinance to do that, making sure that first criteria is important. We want it similar. And we would like city council ordinance. And then with the caveat that if they are assigning us the implementation of it, that we have more significant feedback than I feel that we've had with the drafting of this measure. Is that something, a statements that we can agree on? Do we need to do a separate vote on all three statements? Should we put that as one giant vote? How does everyone feel about that statement? That was a lot.
Sure. So I noticed Julian had his light on, so I want to get his feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might want to break the statement down a little more, but I mean, I guess my thoughts would be, and maybe we made this clear already, but I think maybe it's what you're saying already in part, but that the determination before that we made that we weren't going to enact regulations that covered mobile homes was essentially not because we thought it would be bad, but because we thought we didn't have that explicit authority. And so or we could say that that's how we now look at it, either way, but that's the way I kind of frame it in my mind, that in terms of how do we characterize this, that it's not that we think that this is, that the failure to enact the regs before was not because we thought it would be a bad thing to have those regulations. It was because we thought there was at least some ambiguity and some reasons why our authority to do so might have been somewhat limited. And so, but having that as background, we do think that it would be a positive thing to have some kind of coverage. And I think to Matt's point about the definition of units or changing, definitions, to me, I'm a little uncomfortable about that, because I think, flexibility is nice, but I think this is something that I think we want to be a lot more explicit about if we're actually going to cover mobile homes. And I can see how a lot of people would be very uncomfortable with giving us that much discretion to change what a unit is, because I don't know if City Hall could be a unit if we wanted to make it that way. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could do, and so, and I guess my last point would be, whether it's an ordinance or a ballot initiative. I mean, I guess there's merits to both, but I like the idea of people knowing clearly what they're getting, and if people in Mountain View want mobile homes covered, then great, but I think they should know that that's the decision they're making versus just voting for a kind of a more ambiguous change to the language as to like how we define units or give us that discretion, because then a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that that's going to be a consequence of what they're voting for. So that having been said, and now that you've lost your train of thought, Emily, I mean, I probably would go along with what you were saying, but I just wanted to add that, and maybe we could unpack it into one or two sentences rather than just paragraph.
Just a quick comment. You're kind of reminding me again that one of the major discussion points we had at the time was just a level of discomfort of how deep we're getting away from, what we felt like was the situation that everyone was voting for when they voted for the CSFRA. So that was another kind of guiding factor, and that's why I was kind of leaning towards this being on the ballot, because getting it in front of the people and saying here's the economical system. The economic system that would be in place if this were to go through. But again, I don't think we have the time to kind of lay that out for a ballot measure. So I think to Emily's point, we'll go through with your questions there. I think they're good ones with our level of comfort, and we'll see where we're at. So that sounds good to everybody. So what was your remind me what your first one was?
Okay, so the first question is that we support granting mobile home residents similar protections to those covered by Measure V. The language that you inputted, Julian, is a little, I'm still trying to process that better, but I feel like this is an easier statement to just say. I get why you wanted to add that, and like I see a bit of the value for it, but I feel that this might be a little easier. So do we want to go with that question first? Do we want to go all three questions? I think you wanted a split.
Correct. That works for me as well. I mean, that's fine. I think that works.
So if we are doing this all together, okay, we're doing it all together then. We're breaking it up. We're breaking it up.
You're
Okay.
saying we agree that we should do it one at a time.
Yes. Okay. All right. So did you want to?
Go for it.
All right.
Go for it.
All right. So I make a straw motion that we support similar protections to mobile home residents as are given to those covered under Measure V. All in favor?
I just similar. Yeah, sorry. I thought we were going from more specific to this is general to specific. So
Okay.
I'm more in support actually of.
Let's see.
If I understood how you're breaking them out here, in succession, I think it's just the first one. Just saying general is a little too
Okay.
maybe a friend. Maybe it's a friendly amendment,
Like,
but
how do you want this more specific?
I'm supportive of an ordinance of City Council developing an ordinance
Providing protections.
providing protections, outlining protections to specifically to the, let's say, this economic situation of space rents.
Okay, so like I don't want this too broad
But-
because I don't want to be like we believe in protections for mobile home residents, and that could be they should register what their rents are, but not have anything. So I really want to be very careful because
Right.
when
I think the option I definitely wouldn't be supportive of would be the one that's saying that it's covered by the CSFRA until until they can put together an ordinance or something else happens. Right. Like we know then immediately as the CSFRA is written now, the effective date. Like there'd be a lot of activity that would it'd be more chaos, I think, if there was not an ordinance in place. So I think where you're going, is it that you would like an ordinance with protections for mobile home residents?
yes,
Okay.
I mean the primary thing is I want protections for mobile home residents. How much that protections, I'd like to get as close to Measure B as possible. So if you're letting me know at what point can I dial it back?
Gotcha. I think that it's not. I would hold the personal opinion that it's not. Not covered under current Measure V, and that it wasn't clear to the people at time of voting, per all the other individual specifics that we had at the time. But yes, that we're supportive of someone figuring out coverage, whether it's us or City Council, with an ordinance.
So I guess.
But everyone could vote on that as is, and I know that'd be 4 out of 5, maybe. So.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what.
Sorry. All right. We'll get this finished up here. So that we believe that mobile home space renters deserve similar protections to tenants, but that there are specifics that make it a different situation that should be addressed either by ordinance or specific ballot measure powers to the RHC to. No, just an ordinance, just an ordinance, yeah. Is that where people are? That. No. Okay. Maybe someone else should try to put this into words.
The initial part that Emily and you also said is that the RHC supports granting similar protections of apartment of mobile homes to those that are already given to apartment dwellers, period, and not say that we're waiting for something in the future, which might be an ordinance. I don't like us tying ourselves to the fact that maybe someday council is going to take it upon themselves to create some complicated ordinance that might really make it worse for mobile homes. I think if this is our shot to tell the council, what we're saying is we support this and we believe we have the experience to administer that we already have years of petitions and well, just experience in the bureaucratic implementation of Measure V. And what we would like to do is to expand it to include that. I mean, I don't know that everybody agrees with that, but I think that's much clearer than saying until such time as council is nice enough to pass an ordinance.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
I think where I'm hearing some difference of opinion on this statement is around the word similar to apartment dwellers or similar to other tenants. And I think perhaps what I'm hearing is that that's because there are certain protections that, due to state law, cannot necessarily be held up as like to like. So I'm wondering if we keep the statement more basic, and rather than say similar to apartment dwellers or something of that nature, say something around deserve. We believe that, RHC believes that mobile home dwellers or renters or land leasers, however you want to say it, deserve eviction and quantifiable rent stabilization protections.
Maybe from a maybe to bring this out, right? They're deciding whether to put something on the ballot or not, and I think while our opinions, there's a lot of history here, so I don't think we can delve into all the details there. But I think the question in front of us is, are we recommending, and maybe this is Tim's question, are we recommending that something be on the ballot or not? So maybe, would that be okay if we kind of weighed in on that? We could say,
Yeah, I think we definitely can. I think maybe this is now being colored with my personal opinion. I'm not sure that it belongs on the ballot, but I would like to send a statement to City Council that we would like them to take action on an ordinance soon, rather than put it on the ballot. And so I think that's why I was trying to craft it as like a statement of purpose and then a request, so that it was like a layer 1, layer 2 situation.
well, I think I'm supportive of what you just said, actually. But
Okay, then maybe we'll go with that.
I'll let you shop that around, actually.
Okay, so I would say maybe take a straw vote on the RHC is supportive of mobile home deserving eviction and rent stabilization protections, and would like to see the city council formulate and enact an ordinance soon to address the issues. And maybe we need to get firmer on soon, or maybe soon carries enough weight.
Sorry, I'm gonna. So I support that statement, and there's a third part that we eventually need, and I don't know if you want to add that in to make this so much more complicated, or should we take that as like a separate thing, because it is slightly separate. I think what's great about your statement is that it addresses that first statement, and then what's left is dealing with the second statement. So
for clarification, the just cause is already covered under MRL, so you can even make that statement a little shorter.
there we go.
Excellent.
Are you willing to draft the motion, Nicole? The straw motion?
So, Anki, could I keep it as simple as rent stabilization, RHC, feels that mobile homes deserve rent stabilization protection and encourages the city council to enact an ordinance soon to address this matter.
Do you also want to add, I mean, for the second question, could we add maybe that they engage with us to make those rules if we would be implementing it?
I think that's where we were going to do two separate votes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, gotcha. You
We're
guys,
dividing
you guys
the
are running
meeting.
you're running a better meeting than I can. All right.
So vote one, we're going to get to vote two, but vote one is the RHC feels mobile homes deserve rent stabilization protections and encourages the city council to enact an ordinance to address these matters soon.
Friendly amendment, could we add unique? They have unique put unique in there. That it's a unique situation.
Unique situation. We can say that. To address this unique situation soon. Yay?
All in favor? All right.
We're so sorry, staff. Shall we draft the second statement that we want to deal with?
I'm gonna let Nicole run with it.
So if I'm drafting this second statement, I just want everyone to be aware budgetary concerns are going to come in there. Because if I'm assigned to implement something, but I have no flexibility, I have no input into it, then how can you ask me to fund it? So I would say that the RHC respectfully requests that council elicit and utilize RHC guidance around the construction of the ordinance to ensure that implementation included budgetary concerns and administration is run smoothly by the RHC.
On the fly. All right. All in favor? All right. Unanimous. Did you get all that? Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to try and reiterate it? Okay. The RHC respectfully requests that council include the RHC's guidance in drafting the ordinance so that the implementation and administration, including budgetary consequences, how did I say it, can be successfully borne by the RHC. Is everyone still supportive of that? I edited it a little. Budgetary and administrative consequences may be borne by the RHC.
All right. Okay. All right. Everyone feel good about 8.1? Or sorry, we did have the back page of questions. Did we? On which one? On which one? Oh, yeah,
No,
sorry,
but
yeah.
everyone's still supportive.
We still support that one, yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, did we skip anything that was on the last page there, Unky, of questions to the RHC? Or did we kind of cover that stuff?
I think you covered most of it. The first three questions are about council oversight or the relationship, and I think the RHC was very clear in its response to that. And in regards to any additional parameters, qualifications for the separate petition process, I think you did mention, but you didn't vote, just talk about those guiding principles. So I think we're okay. In addition, we will include this other input regarding the AGA and then mobile homes.
All right. Thank you. Point of order, I was going to recommend, or maybe move 8.3. How many do you think we can get through in, or 15 minutes for each one?
These are just reports. They're pretty quick. Sorry, I could do 15, 20 minutes for the two.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to if.
Oh wait, one more thing at 8.1. I
Sure.
wonder if it may need a vote, but I would like a statement that we would like that this ballot initiative is clear and specific in order to ensure it's viability. I don't know if that is necessary, but I feel like that, I'm sure you guys got in the angry emails too, that were sent to us of being like, oh, why are we wasting everyone's time? So I don't want to outright say it's like, don't waste everyone's time. Make sure that whatever this thing is clear and doesn't make it difficult to pass by throwing a whole bunch of other stuff. And we were clear with our guidance to that in specific questions, but I would love an overarching statement about that.
I guess the question to Tim, do you feel like that has come through in the items we've had already? That yeah.
Yes, in regards to RHC input, yes, you've been very clear, very specific, just clear and specific regarding viability. No poison pills, in other words. Okay.
All right. Yeah, I'm just trying to another vote. At this point, could threaten we're already running up against our over under on time. I can see. So, okay, we'll move on to 8.2.
Okay.
Which is quarterly financial expenditures. We have a staff report.
So a quick recap of the last quarter of last fiscal year 18-19. As you can see, we keep track of the four main categories of our budget. The personnel services were lower than budgeted due to the delayed onboarding of the office assistant. For non-personnel services, we're also under budget because we're gradually using the software budget, and also the Q4 invoices were not yet received by the end of the fiscal year. The capital outlay is also the database management system, and further phases occur in fiscal year 19-20. That's why we only expended 35% by the end of the year. And then the inter-fund expenditures are a certain percentage of the total actual, and that always gets charged in December of the year. So that's 100%. That's the update for the quarterly financials.
I like
Any
that.
questions?
Yeah, any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Would anyone from the public like to comment on this specific agenda item 8.2?
I agree.
All right. Then
Next.
the next
Okay.
item, 8.3.
Yeah. So this is an overview, a yearly overview of the fund results for fiscal year 18-19. Part of this discussion we already had when we were talking about the budget 19-20, but just a recap of the actuals. So we are giving a comparison of adopted versus estimated and the final unaudited numbers. I just got reassurance from our finance director, like the audited numbers will only be available by the end of October, but it would be highly surprised if that would change from the current unaudited numbers. Again, we are always looking at the four same categories, the key expenditures of our program. Just a little overview, the staffing is in personnel directly charged to the Rental Housing Committee budget. The general operating cost, anything that has to do with running the office, running the meetings, office supplies, materials for outreach and education. Third-party professional and technical services are the consultant services that we use, hearing officers, legal services, rental housing helpline, pre-hearing settlement conference, mediators, relocation services agency, facilitation services as needed, and translation services. And city resources and administrative support is the wonderful support we're getting from all other city departments, such as in this case, the financial department. This is, in short, the overview of the comparison between adopted, estimated, and the unaudited actuals, and the variance between these numbers. The variances are in one-time expenditures, as some costs for litigation have been incurred, but no major activity by the end of the fiscal year. And certain IT costs for the database systems have not yet been incurred and have been carried over to the next year. As you can see, the operating expenditures were less than budgeted, and I can give you an overview of that in the next slide. As you can see, staffing, we were understaffed for part of the year. That's why that variance occurred. In general, operating costs is due to postage and materials, and we only had limited use of external office space, and we moved back into city premises. For professional technical services, we used less hearing officer services, less pre-settlement conferences, and relocation costs. They were all incurred at a lower rate than budgeted. I also want to talk about the rebudget and encumbrances. The rebudget includes the limited period expenditures related to the database system. We rebudgeted $146,400 for that. Encumbrances are legal obligations for funds that have not been paid by the end of the fiscal year, but are still due. Like for all our consultants, we receive our Q4 bills, usually after the fiscal year is over. So these are being encumbered, so we are able to pay them in this fiscal year. That was a total amount of $176,444. And then, as we talked about before, we created a reserve that provides a balance for unanticipated expenditures. The staff had recommended to make a total reserve of 20%, and this year, in the new budget, we adopted the second part of that. So in total, we now have a reserve of $382,000. So that concludes the presentation, and I encourage any questions you may have.
Thank you, Anki. Any questions about the budget? All right. Any comments from the public regarding this budget? All right. I will slow us down for a second and just say, I know a lot of hard work goes into this, so I feel great that you guys were able to hit it in 5 minutes and cover this. But I'll try to send you separate questions and look through it about this. But again, that 380,000+ number, I hope we communicate that to council as evidence that we take our budget seriously. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anki.
Yeah. And then the next item is to formally adopt a resolution to adopt your meeting schedule for the rest of 2019 and for fiscal year 2020. And this is the proposed schedule. And the Rental Housing Committee can always adopt other meeting times when necessary. And the recommendation is to adopt a resolution. Does anyone have questions with regards to the dates at this point?
I just had one. So the 2 in June, are those placeholders for if we have petitions? Because typically, I know we're taking off July, but typically we take off July. But are any of these, in your mind, being held for if we have petition activity or appeal activity?
Well, we always try to keep that into account by scheduling enough meetings. If at some point in time, and there are no appeals and there are no pressuring issues that need to be determined in a certain timeline, the Rental Housing Committee can always decide to postpone a meeting or change the schedule.
And typically in June, we've had 2 RHC meetings for budget adoption purposes.
Can I just note, I think it's supposed to be June 29th. The 28th is a Sunday.
Oh, no Sundays for the Rental Housing Committee, June 29th.
It's my birthday.
I will change that accordingly.
Sounds great. Any other questions from committee? Did I already call for public comment on
You
this
did
one?
not call for
Oh,
public
okay.
comment, but I do have one question. This is really far off. It's the last date that we're looking at. December 14th is getting really close to holiday season. Like currently ours is this year, it's December 9th. Is there a way that we can move it a little bit more forward? Or
December 14, make it
Yeah.
1 week earlier, maybe?
yeah, something like
Okay,
that.
I'll-
I worry about the holiday schedule. I don't know what everyone else feels about that. I don't like the idea of our meetings encroaching on holidays.
That would be December 7 then?
Sorry, the proposal would be to move it from December 9th to December 7th? Or the 14th one?
14th.
Oh, okay.
For 2020, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah, I don't know what I'm doing that day right now, but per your point, yeah, I mean, I think we could try to move that up, or revisit
Decide to do that.
revisit mid 2020 and see if we need to change any dates.
Yeah.
But yeah, open to that concern. Great. All right. Any other questions from the committee? Any public comment on this item? All right. Seeing none, I think
You need to adopt.
we need to adopt a resolution. Correct. Do I have a motion to adopt? All right, Emily.
Let's do this. I move to adopt a resolution establishing a meeting schedule for the Rental Housing Committee for the remainder of 2019 and for the calendar year of 2020. Woohoo, second wind.
All in favor?
Was there a second on that?
Second.
Seconded.
It's getting late, guys.
Second.
All right, it's seconded. All in favor? Aye. All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much, Anki.
Item 9.1 is a brief update on the monthly status report. I'm not going to go in depth in this. We will do that next month, I think. Typically, everything is just kind of continuing along as it has for the past year or so. We did break out the information requests that go through Project Sentinel and the Mountain View Housing Helpline into more concrete and definitive categories. So I will go over those next month as well. We are in the process of finishing out all of our petitions for last fiscal year, and we have received now 6 tenant petitions as of August, and we actually do have a couple of landlord petitions that are coming up, I believe. So we'll have some information coming up with those in the next month or so. And then one thing that I would like to note is the MNOI for the Consumer Price Index. Those numbers just came out today for August, and so for those 3 indices, for the rent of primary residence, it's at 23%. For housing, it has held steady at 19%. And for all items, it has held steady again for the next few months at 14%. So that is the only update compared to what you actually see here. And I will be updating this agenda item as well to reflect those changes. And then we did host a workshop last month on evictions. It was landlord focused, and this past month, just last week, we had the same one but focused for tenants. So we've had 2 workshops within the new fiscal year, and we have one coming up. So we had 2 workshops that had 20 attendees total. That doesn't include this month's. That was for July and August. And then we have one coming up on October 24th that is focused on security deposits, and that is for everyone. All people are welcome. And then to end out the year, we have one on November 14th for addressing challenging tenants, which is landlord focused. And on December 12th, we have one focused for tenants on addressing challenging living situations. And then that'll end our calendar year for workshops. Does anyone have any questions?
Quick one, which ones are most popular?
The ones that were focused on habitability were really popular this year. So we had quite a few property owners come out for the one that was landlord focused, and quite a few tenants come out for the one that was tenant focused. And then some of the ones that just our general CSFRA, those are always popular as well. So, yeah. Any other questions?
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I think without further ado, I think we can adjourn this regular meeting of the RHC until our next one on October 7th. Thank you.